Hi everyone, we're Mimicker, here to introduce all kinds of knowledge, even the stuff we didn't know about.
Yeah, and today we are going deep into something that literally changes how we define who we are.
Seriously.
Like, if you're listening to this right now, this deep dive is going to fundamentally alter the way you view your own body, your decisions, and your mind.
You know, it's funny, if you look back thousands of years at ancient Indian Vedic culture, there was this profound intuition about the human body.
Right.
In their chakra system, they pointed to a concept called the Manipura.
The solar plexus.
Exactly. That is the solar plexus located right above the navel. And they visualized it as this incredibly intense, glowing yellow fire.
Wow.
And they believed this specific spot in the gut was the absolute center of human willpower, courage and decision-making.
It's a beautiful concept. But, I mean, for centuries, modern Western science kind of just patted ancient philosophy on the head.
Yeah, totally.
The prevailing attitude was essentially, well, that's a lovely metaphor, but let's be serious. The brain inside our skull does all the thinking and feeling.
Right. We put the brain on this untouchable pedestal.
Yeah.
But when I was looking through the data we collect for this deep dive, my mind was entirely blown.
Oh, I bet.
Fast forward to today, and modern neuroscience has just proven the ancient Vedic intuition right.
It really has.
Our mission today is to understand how the trillions of microbes living in your gut act as a literal second brain. Like, we are talking about microscopic bacteria actually dictating your learning capacity, your daily anxiety levels, and maybe even the biological baseline of your free will.
It completely flips the scientific script.
Yeah.
I mean, we are moving away from viewing the gut as just a passive mechanical digestion tube.
Right.
And finally understanding it as an active, powerful command center that dictates how the brain operates.
I have to admit, when I first read through the data we collect, I was in a state of enthusiastic disbelief.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
I mean, how is it physically possible that the microscopic bacteria digesting my morning coffee are secretly pulling the strings of my mind? Okay, let's unpack this, because we really need to start with the hard evidence. We aren't just talking about a metaphor anymore, are we?
Not at all. To understand the sheer scale of this, we need to look at a landmark study. It was published in January 2026 in PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Okay.
Catherine Amato's team at Northwestern University ran an experiment that, well, it fundamentally rewrites the rules of neuroscience.
That's a big claim.
It is. They set out to see if gut bacteria actually drive the evolution and the physical development of the brain itself.
And the way they tested this is brilliant. They used germ-free mice. Wait, can you explain what a germ-free mouse actually is? Because it sounds like science fiction.
It does sound like sci-fi.
Yeah.
A germ-free mouse is an animal raised from birth inside a completely sterile, hermetically sealed bubble.
Wow.
Yeah. They breathe filtered air, eat sterilized food, and possess absolutely zero microbes of their own.
That's wild.
Inside their gut, there is nothing. It makes them a perfect biological blank slate.
Okay, so you have these blank slate mice, and then the researchers took gut bacteria from 3 different types of primates, right?
Correct.
They used feces from humans and squirrel monkeys, both of which have very large brains relative to their body size.
Exactly.
And they also took bacteria from macaques, which have much smaller brains.
Yeah, they transplanted the gut microbiomes from those 3 specific primates directly into the germ-free mice.
Okay.
The goal was to see if the software of the gut could actually change the hardware of the mouse's brain.
And the results after just 8 weeks were staggering.
They really were.
The mice that received the bacteria from the large brain primates, the humans and squirrel monkeys, showed massive increases in gene expression related to learning and synaptic plasticity in their brains.
I want to pause there because synaptic plasticity is incredibly important for you as a listener to understand. Plasticity is the biological foundation of learning. It's the physical mechanism your brain uses to form new neural connections when you learn a new skill or form a memory.
This is crucial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the mice with the human bacteria suddenly had brains that were biologically primed to learn.
But then the mice that got the bacteria from the smaller brain macaques showed a sharp decrease in those learning expressions.
Yeah.
Worse, their brains started showing genetic patterns linked to ADHD, schizophrenia, and autism. The mouse brains literally started to mimic the primate brains that the bacteria originally came from.
It's incredible.
So it's like downloading a completely different operating system into a computer, and the physical circuitry of the motherboard actually morphs and changes to match it.
What's fascinating here is that this completely destroys the old assumption that the gut is just a passive observer of the brain's commands.
Right.
By using those blank slate mice, the researchers proved pure causation, not just correlation.
That's huge.
The microbes are actively sculpting the brain's genetic expression. They are the architects of the brain, not just the tenants of the stomach.
But wait, I have to stop you there. My stomach is all the way down in my abdomen, and my brain is locked inside my skull.
Right.
If these microscopic organisms are down there digesting food, how are they physically communicating with the brain fast enough to change its structure?
Wait, so when I feel an emotion, I'm actually just experiencing the chemical exhaust of a microbial factory in my stomach.
To a shocking degree, yes. We have to stop thinking of the gut as a stomach and start thinking of it as a massive neurochemical factory.
Okay.
Let's look at serotonin. We usually associate serotonin entirely with the brain. It's the famous neurotransmitter that regulates your mood, your sleep cycles, and your appetite.
Right, the happy chemical.
Exactly. Most people assume their brain makes it.
Yeah.
But in reality, 95% of your body's serotonin is manufactured in your gut.
95%. But how do the bacteria make that happen? Do they produce it themselves? It happens in a couple of ways. Most of that serotonin is produced by specific cells in your gut lining, called enterochromaffin cells.
Okay.
Now, these cells don't just produce serotonin on a whim. They're triggered to do it by microbial byproducts, specifically things called short-chain fatty acids.
Hold on, let's break that down. What is a short-chain fatty acid?
Think of it as the chemical exhaust left over after the bacteria finish digesting your food.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, when you eat a piece of broccoli, your body can't digest the fiber, but your gut bacteria can. They feast on it, and as a byproduct, they release these short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs.
Okay.
Those fatty acids act like chemical messengers, knocking on the doors of your gut cells and commanding them to pump out serotonin.
That is wild.
Furthermore, we now know that certain strains of bacteria, like lactobacillus, don't even bother with the middleman. They can synthesize serotonin directly, all on their own.
So the bacteria are either commanding our cells to make the nappy chemicals, or they are just producing the happy chemicals themselves. And reviewing the data we collect, it's not just serotonin. They also regulate dopamine, which drives your motivation, and GABA, which is the brain's main calming chemical.
Right, but producing the chemicals is a huge feat. But you asked the crucial question earlier, how does that chemical signal travel all the way up to the skull?
Yeah, exactly.
This brings us to the vagus nerve. Imagine the vagus nerve as a massive, high-speed fiber optic cable running directly from your abdomen through your chest and straight into your brainstem.
Okay, so it's a two-way communication cable between the brain and the gut.
You would think it's a two-way street with equal traffic, but here's the wild part. 80% of the nerve fibers in the vagus nerve are afferent.
Efferent, meaning what?
That means they are dedicated entirely to sending information up to the brain, not down from it.
Are you serious? So it's basically a one-way highway where the gut is doing 80% of the talking and the brain is just sitting there taking orders.
That's a highly accurate way to frame it. The bacteria use this fiber optic cable constantly. Sometimes their chemical exhaust triggers hormones that stimulate the nerve directly. Other times, if your gut barrier is slightly damaged, which happens when we eat highly processed foods, the bacteria and their byproducts can literally make direct physical contact with the nerve endings.
Yikes. And there's another pathway too, right? The immune system. I read that the gut flora can trigger things called cytokines.
Yes, cytokines. They are essentially chemical distress flares used by your immune system.
Okay.
If your gut bacteria are unhappy or out of balance, they trigger these inflammatory flares that travel rapidly through your bloodstream.
How fast are we talking?
Incredibly fast. We are talking about signals reaching the amygdala and the hypothalamus, the emotional and fear centers of your brain, in mere seconds.
So if you're listening to this right now and you feel a sudden wave of motivation to start a project, or conversely, if you can't seem to calm down after a stressful meeting, well, those aren't necessarily conscious thoughts originating in your mind. Those feelings might be the downstream effects of the chemical reactions happening right now in your microbial factory.
Which naturally leads us to wonder, if these microscopic organisms are running our neurochemistry, where do we get them in the first place?
Right. Did we inherit them? It turns out We acquire this biological operating system in our very first moments of life. It's essentially a lottery of birth.
It really is. The initial colonization of your gut sets the trajectory for your entire neurological development.
Wow.
If a baby is delivered vaginally, they are coated in and naturally swallow the mother's native microbiome, which is predominantly made up of lactobacillus and bacteria.
But if a baby is born via C-section, they completely bypass that environment.
Exactly.
Instead, their very first microbes come from the hospital room air and human skin bacteria like Staphylococcus. And looking at the data we collect, the numbers on this are stark.
Already start.
Children born via C-section have a 23% higher risk for autism spectrum disorder, alongside significantly higher risks for ADHD. But why? Why does missing out on lactobacillus in the first few seconds of life lead to a neurodevelopmental disorder?
To understand the why, we have to look at the immune system. When a baby is born, their immune system is immature. It needs to be trained.
Okay.
Those early lactobacillus bacteria act like drill sergeants, training the immune cells on what to attack and what to ignore.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If those specific bacteria are missing, the immune system doesn't get properly trained. It panics. It starts releasing high levels of those inflammatory cytokines, those distress flares we talked about earlier.
And because a newborn's blood-brain barrier isn't fully closed yet, those inflammatory flares cross right into the brain.
You're hitting on the core mechanism there. The inflammation enters the developing brain and actively disrupts neural pruning, which is the process where the brain organizes its circuitry.
Right.
That structural disruption is what leads to the higher risk of neurodevelopmental disorders.
That is tragic, honestly.
And we see a similar risk with repeated antibiotic use in young children. Antibiotics essentially carpet bomb the gut ecosystem.
Yeah, they wipe out everything, right?
Exactly. Kids who have their microbiomes repeatedly wiped out face a 2 to 4 times higher risk of developing these disorders compared to kids with intact microbiomes.
To really visualize what happens in a microbe vacuum, scientists went back to those germ-free mice in the sterile bubbles.
Oh, this study is fascinating.
When a mouse grows up with 0 microbes, its neurological development is completely broken. Their stress response goes completely haywire.
Yeah, just shut down.
They show severe social deficits. They cower and actively avoid strangers instead of investigating them like normal, healthy mice do.
And researchers discovered a strict developmental time window. If they take those terrified germ-free mice and give them a healthy microbiome before they are 6 weeks old, their stress responses normalize. They recover.
Oh, it's got.
But if they wait until the mice are 14 weeks old, the neurological damage is permanent.
Wow. Permanent.
The brain has finalized its architecture based on a broken microbial foundation, and no amount of healthy bacteria can fix it.
But the most shocking part to me is what happens when they mix and match.
Oh, right.
They took feces from a highly anxious, skittish strain of mice and transplanted it into a naturally calm, germ-free mouse. And the calm mouse immediately became anxious. The anxiety trait literally transferred via feces.
It's unbelievable.
I just marvel at that. Anxiety isn't just a state of mind. It is a physical, biological entity that you can pack up and transfer from one living body to another.
This raises an important question. If our initial microbial seeding is this vital to preventing permanent anxiety and neurological deficits, do modern public health policies regarding C-sections and pediatric antibiotics need an urgent rethink?
I would think so.
Because the science suggests we might be inadvertently setting up millions of children for lifelong neurological struggles simply by altering their very first bacterial exposure.
It really makes you pause and think about how fragile our mental baseline is. But let's bring it back to the present moment for our listener.
Good idea.
We've established that microbes set our baseline at birth, but can they actively manipulate our daily decisions as adults? Because if they can, we need to talk about parasites and willpower.
Oh, let's look at one of the most dramatic, frankly terrifying examples in nature, a parasite called Toxoplasma gondii.
Right.
It's a single-celled organism with a diabolically complex life cycle. Its ultimate biological goal is to reproduce, but it can only reproduce inside the intestines of a cat.
Okay, so how does it get there?
Well, to get there, it often infects intermediate hosts, like mice.
But wait, mice are naturally terrified of cats? They avoid them at all costs?
Usually they do. But Toxoplasma gondii needs the mouse to be eaten by the cat.
Oh, no.
So the parasite migrates from the mouse's gut up into its brain, specifically targeting the amygdala. Once there, it actively alters the epigenetic markers in the mouse's brain cells.
Let's translate that for the listener. What does altering an epigenetic marker actually do to the mouse?
Think of genes like light switches. An epigenetic marker is like putting a thick piece of duct tape over the switch.
Okay.
The parasite literally tapes down the gene that produces the fear response to cat urine.
That is insane.
The infected mouse doesn't just lose its fear, it becomes fatally attracted to the smell of the cat, essentially delivering itself on a silver platter to be eaten.
It is nature's most diabolical mind control, and here is the bomb drop from the data we collect. 1/3 of all humans walking the earth have this parasite in their brains right now.
Yes.
And it affects us too.
Mm.
Epidemiological studies show that humans infected with Toxoplasma gondii have a 2.65 times higher risk of getting into car crashes
Wow.
and a 2.73 times higher risk of developing schizophrenia.
It even alters human professional behavior in measurable ways. Infected individuals are significantly more likely to become entrepreneurs simply because the parasite has artificially suppressed their natural, healthy fear of financial failure.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if a single parasite can hijack a brain like that, what are the trillions of normal bacteria doing to our daily choices?
Exactly.
Think about your own cravings. Let's connect this to the human obesity epidemic. We always used to think bariatric weight loss surgery worked entirely because it physically shrinks the stomach, right? Mechanically forcing a person to eat less food.
That is the traditional mechanical view.
Ugh.
But the biological reality is far deeper.
How so?
When you surgically alter the stomach, you change the acidity and the oxygen levels in the gut. This causes a massive die-off of certain bacteria and a bloom of new ones.
Oh, I see.
The surgery radically alters the patient's microbiome. If scientists take the feces from a post-bariatric surgery human and transplant it into a mouse, that mouse suddenly improves its insulin sensitivity and starts burning more energy without having the surgery itself.
The same goes for humans. Fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMT, in obese humans improves their metabolic markers. This completely reframes how we should view our own willpower.
It absolutely does.
Think about the last time you had an intense sugar craving. When you're beating yourself up for eating a donut, what if that isn't a moral failure?
Right.
What if it's just your gut bacteria throwing a tantrum and demanding their favorite food? Because if your gut is heavily populated by sugar-loving microbes, they are going to use that vagus nerve fiber optic cable to scream at your brain until you feed them.
That reframing is vital. It's not a free pass to abandon healthy eating, but it shifts the entire paradigm.
Yeah.
When you eat a healthy diet, you slowly cultivate a healthy microbial ecosystem. Over time, those beneficial microbes send calming signals, which in turn makes self-discipline biologically easier.
That makes so much sense.
When you crave junk food, you aren't just fighting your own weak willpower, you are fighting a deeply entrenched bacterial army that relies on sugar to survive.
If microbes are actively controlling our cravings and our moods, scientists must be trying to harness this to actually cure us, right?
Yes, they are.
This leads us to the death of the Cartesian mind and the future of psychiatry.
We are already witnessing a new wave of treatments that sound like magic but are grounded in hard biology.
Like what?
Well, those fecal transplants, or FMTs, are showing incredible results in clinical trials. They are drastically lowering depression severity in psychiatric patients who simply didn't respond to traditional antidepressant drugs.
That's amazing.
They're even curing severe chronic insomnia within a matter of 4 weeks, while simultaneously reducing the patient's comorbid anxiety.
And it's not just full transplants. Scientists are developing precision probiotics.
Right.
Reviewing the data we collect, it highlights specific strains like bifidobacterium, which produces high levels of acetate.
Yeah, that's a key one.
In placebo-controlled clinical trials, giving this specific targeted probiotic to Alzheimer's patients under the age of 70 actually improved their cognitive test scores.
Incredible.
Furthermore, prebiotics, which is basically the specialized fiber that acts as food for the good bacteria, are showing real promise in lowering the severe stress responses in patients suffering from PTSD.
Which brings us to the philosophical climax of all this incredible research.
Oh, I love this part.
For hundreds of years, Western science and philosophy were dominated by Cartesian mind-body dualism. The philosopher René Descartes famously argued that the mind is entirely separate from the physical body.
Right, the whole "I think, therefore I am" thing.
Exactly. That human consciousness is this rational, sovereign dictator floating safely above the messy physical machinery of flesh and blood.
But this microbiome research completely destroys that idea.
It shatters it completely. In its place, Scientists are adopting the extended cognition theory.
Okay, what is that?
This theory argues that your cognitive processes, your thoughts, your fears, your desires, don't stop at the borders of your skull.
Right.
They extend throughout your entire body, deeply integrating with your microbial ecosystem. We are not single, isolated individuals. Biologically speaking, we are a superorganism. You contain just as many microbial cells as you do human cells.
So what does this all mean? It means you are actually a walking, talking ecosystem. You are a committee.
A committee.
I like that.
Every decision you make, every sudden mood you feel, every craving you experience is put to a biological vote.
Now, to be clear to the listener, the microbes aren't pulling heavy levers in your brain like a direct puppeteer.
Okay, fair.
Their influence is probabilistic. They shift the odds of your choices. They set the chemical baseline of your free will.
Interesting.
Your bacteria might make you 20% more likely to feel anxious before a meeting, or 30% more likely to cave and eat that donut. But your human consciousness still has the ultimate final say.
It's just that the final say is heavily influenced by trillions of microscopic lobbyists in your gut.
Exactly.
Let's quickly summarize this mind-bending journey. We started with the ancient Vedic intuition that the solar plexus is the physical center of our courage.
Right.
We moved to Northwestern's primate transplant study, proving that bacteria physically sculpt the brain. We broke down how the vagus nerve acts as a high-speed fiber optic cable for chemicals like serotonin.
We learned how your mode of birth and early childhood antibiotics shape your neurological destiny, and how anxiety can literally be transferred via feces.
That's still wild to me.
Finally, we looked at how parasites and gut flora manipulate our daily cravings, and how science is using this exact mechanism to cure deep depression and insomnia.
The overarching lesson for you, listening right now, is profound. The next time you feel a random, unexplainable burst of anxiety or an uncontrollable craving for a late-night snack, remember that you aren't just fighting a battle against yourself.
Yeah.
You are actively negotiating with trillions of tiny, demanding roommates.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. If our baseline personalities, our deep-seated anxieties, and our daily motivations are fundamentally shaped by our gut flora, what happens when we finally master this science? What happens when you can eventually go to a clinic and engineer custom daily probiotics designed to make you permanently braver, infinitely more focused, or relentlessly happy?
That's a deep question.
If you optimize your internal ecosystem to that extreme degree, are you still yourself, or have you just engineered your biology into someone else entirely?
Wow.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you enjoyed our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and turn on the notification bell.